Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Linda Smith. I am a previous educator, a veteran of Okaloosa County Schools. I have been a teacher, a counselor, an assistant principal, and a principal. My purpose today is to talk with prospective volunteers and provide you tips for being an educational advocate for the children that you serve. So let's get started. Today our training is going to focus on how do you get a basic understanding of working within the school system so that you can advocate for your child or your children. And a subset of that is we're going to talk about school stability and its importance, needed educational services, including special education services, and how to encourage participation in extracurricular activities that provide your child or children with a sense of normalcy. First, when you receive a case and the child is of school age, who should you contact and how will you build a relationship with the child's school? It's very important to do that because you're going to be advocating at the school often, and you're also going to be advocating for the child in the community. So who should you contact and build that relationship? How will you go about doing that? What will you do to access school records for your child? How will you know what questions to ask when you go to the school and when you meet the secretary for the first time? How will you know what aftercare or before care programs are available at the school? Are there interlocal educational agreements that you need to know about so that you can be a better advocate for your child? Is there available surrogate training if your child is in need of more parenting than their current parent can provide? And finally, just like in the guardian ad litem system and the court system, a lot of times in education we speak in acronyms. And these are not things to be fearful of, they're just things to be aware of. And we're going to have those acronyms spelled out for you at the end of this PowerPoint. Why is it so important to be an educational advocate for your child? There's some very important studies, and this one in 2009 tells us that of dependent children, 50% of 17-year-olds that are in our dependency system perform below grade level. Also, 46% of our 17-year-olds, and these are those that have taken the FCAT as 10th graders and are taking it again, usually as juniors, do not pass the FCAT. FCAT is an important test in the state of Florida. FCAT is an acronym for Florida Comprehensive Assessment Test. 32% of our 21-year-olds that came through the dependency system have not completed high school, they've not completed their GED, and they're not involved in any vocational training. And only 26% of our youth that are aging out of foster care have received a standard high school diploma. Stability is extremely important for our children. It's important for every child, but when you move around from school to school, it says, according to this study, that it takes an average of 4 to 6 months for a child to recover from that move and get back in the routine that they had established prior to the move. That tells us that stability for these children is huge. And a national study found that youth that had one fewer placement change every year were almost twice as likely to graduate from high school before leaving care. Another important thing to consider, and this is a reference that you may want to look at, is Ruby Payne, A Framework for Understanding Poverty. Many of our children are in poverty, and their backgrounds are very different than ours may be. In addition, we have to understand Maslow's hierarchy, which says that when my basic needs are not being met, the importance of school tends to be diminished in my home. Therefore, your advocacy is even more important for these children. So when you go to the school, who will you contact? Well, if you're dealing with a child who's in preschool, let's say even daycare, you would talk to the child's teacher. You would talk to the people who work with the child during the day, including the teacher's aide. If the owner or manager of the daycare is there, you might find a time to chat with them and just ask, how is the child doing? When you go to elementary school, many times your child is going to be working with one main teacher during the day. But don't forget that many of our elementary schools are departmentalized, which means that there could be 2 to 3 teachers when you schedule a parent conference that you'll be wanting to ask to please come to the conference. One might be language arts and reading, one might be math and science, and then there might be another person that's in social studies. You would also want to be in close contact with the guidance counselor. If the child is in exceptional student education, or the acronym is ESE, then you would want to also be in close contact with that teacher. And if the child goes to before or after school programs, you would also want to be in contact with that teacher. Sometimes schools have programs run for after school care that are not necessarily directly related to the school. They're programs that are brought into the school. So know the difference and invite the appropriate people if you go for a conference. In the middle school, it gets a little bit more complex. At our age, we probably remember a homeroom teacher. But know that another word for homeroom teacher is advisory teacher. So if a person says, are you wanting the advisor or the advisory teacher to be invited, they have an opportunity to see that child every day and establish a close relationship with that child. So their homeroom or advisory teacher you would want to speak with. Also in middle school, they may have 6 teachers throughout the day. Understand the constraints on their time. You may have to work a conference such that all of the teachers don't come at exactly the same time. You may have to be some before school and some after school, because speaking with that many people sometimes takes a long time. The guidance counselor, again, at the middle school level is imperative because they know the children and they know the youth. Again, if the child is in exceptional student education, you would want to make sure that you make contact with that teacher and stay abreast of everything that that teacher is doing to help the child. After school, sometimes there's tutoring. Sometimes there are extracurricular clubs, and sometimes there are sport programs that the child is involved in. These people are all critical for you to be part of that network of saying, we want to work with this child as a team. Again, please understand that these teachers have over 100 students in a day, so their time is very critical, and be very, very understanding of how you need to schedule your time. At the high school level, again, there may be an advisory teacher. It may be called also a homeroom teacher. They may have 6 or 7 teachers in a school day, in addition to the guidance counselor, the exceptional student education, and we hope there are even more people that are involved with the child in after-school programs. Hopefully also coaches, because these wraparound services are what help to make the child more successful. Now, how do you build relationships when you go to the school? First, understand that schools are very, very busy places. When you're standing and waiting, wait until it is your time, because phones are ringing and people are coming and going. Make an appointment with the main teacher. Also find out if you can ask if you can speak with the school counselor. Request a copy of the latest school records, but know that you may have to go back to the school and get those later, because people cannot stop what they're doing in serving the needs of the children in their school and the parents in their school to make copies of records for you. So you need to be very, very flexible. If you receive records and you don't understand what is in the records, ask for an appointment with the school counselor so that you can better understand what the school records are all about. And please understand, it's been a while since many of us have been in school, and things change every year. You could contact the school through the child's teacher, and we would want you to use a personal email if they provide that to you. If they choose not to provide that to you, you will have to have the ability to leave phone messages and ask for a call back. Give as many phone numbers as you can, because the teacher is going to try to call you back when they do not have children in their classroom. So understand that your time is probably more flexible than their time. Also, have before you the list of things that you would like to talk about so that you make the conversation as succinct as possible. Remember, these people are making time for you to help you aid this child. And again, if you're working with a preschool or you're working with an elementary teacher, they may have 24 children. If it's departmentalized, they may have 3 sets of 24 children. You have 1, 2, 3 children you're advocating for. So understand their time constraints. And again, if you see something that you don't understand, or there are questions that you have about how the school operates, what time the school takes in, lets out, does it have an after-school program, don't be afraid to ask questions. Something that you also might want to do is talk to the school nurse. Many of our students have medication issues. They take medication and they go to the school nurse to have this medication dispensed. Or there's an emergency card that will say what kinds of medication the child takes, even if the child does not take it at school. Another thing to look for is the school nurse is a wonderful resource, because many times children who are looking for someone to talk with will ask permission to leave their classroom and go up to the school nurse and share important information. So again, your interest in all of these different facets of the school day is imperative for the child. When you receive your case and you check with your CAM, who is your Child Advocacy Manager, and you make face-to-face contact with the school, then you're going to ask, may I have access to the records? Make sure you have your order appointing the guardian and your notice of acceptance. They cannot release information to you if you do not have your badge stating who you are, your order appointing, and your notice of acceptance. Many of our schools have the ability now to look at grades online. If you want the ability to access grades online, I would definitely suggest that for everybody. There are various methods depending on the school system. Sometimes you ask for a student number. Sometimes you'll ask for a username and password. You can then go into what is called the Parent Portal, and you can see what the parent can see on a daily basis. You can see the child's current grades, and remember that is current according to what the teacher has had an opportunity to grade and enter, and everything now is automated. You can see your child's attendance in school, and you can even see the assignments that the child will be doing in the future, or those maybe that have slipped by them and they have not done, so that you can take the time to ask your child about those school grades. When you go to the school, you would want to find out when was the child enrolled in this particular school. You'd also want to ask questions about how long has the child been here, what is the child's attendance record, does the child tend to have a lot of tardies, do they have truancy, unexplained, do they have excused and unexcused absences, do you or does the school see any pattern that you can pinpoint to sit down and talk with your child? Why are you being tardy so much? Why is it you tend to check out on Friday afternoons? It's also important as we advocate for our children to show them that being in school is important. So if I need to go to have some kind of evaluation performed and my school gets out at 2:30 and the center that I'm going to doesn't close until 5 o'clock, let's try to schedule the appointment after school. This is always a good pattern for us to get into. Has your child changed schools a lot? If they have changed schools a lot, remember we talked about stability. Just like for us, if we change our jobs or we move from one house to another, we have to acclimate. The children have to acclimate as well. If they have changed to more than one school in a year, what is being done to see if we could provide a bit more stability? We cannot help if our child goes into foster care. If that decision is made, the question could be asked, would we not be able to provide something for this child to be transported to the school so they can finish the school year in where they began? Because that is important, we know, for stability. Some of our children have had difficulty. School has not been a happy place for their parents, perhaps. Maybe modeling at their home that school was important did not occur. These are all things that you can do. You can ask, is this child in the right grade according to their age? Have they been retained? Did they move around a lot and therefore were not able to take advantage to the greatest extent of a particular grade level? And in elementary school, if they lost a lot of the basic skills, they may have had to repeat a grade. If you're working with a child that is in the 9th grade through 12th grade, you want to ask, are they on target for the number of credits that they have accrued to be able to move to the next grade? Is the child making appropriate progress? Every child is not going to be an A student. But if you read the records and the child has had more success earlier in their school career, and they're now suddenly falling into a pattern where they're not as successful, we would want to ask the question of the child and of the school, perhaps in a conference, what can we do to help the child get back up to the kind of progress they've been able to have in the past? It might be related to a new environment. Might be related to difficulty that they're having. It might be related to medication that they are or are not taking at this point in time. Now the next thing is reading and math on grade level. This is kind of a nebulous process because math and reading on grade level are measured in different school systems according to different measures. Find out in your child's school, are we talking about FCAT? Are we talking about other informal measures? Are we talking about input from our teacher? What are we talking about to say that we feel the child is or is not on grade level in reading and math? And we know that reading and math, though all subjects are important, are the building blocks for success for the future. Has your child passed the Florida Comprehensive Assessment Test? Now, in the elementary school and in the middle school, each school system is going to have some guidelines that you need to look into. So check with the county leadership or the leadership at the school. When the child is in the 10th grade, they are going to have to pass the FCAT 10th grade reading and mathematics test in order to get a regular standard high school diploma. If they do not pass, and the passing score is a scale score of 300, if they do not pass, we really need to find out, is there an alternative or concordant score that the child can get enrolled in for another kind of test that might be easier, it might be more their learning style. For example, the ACT and the SAT. For some students who cannot reach the 300 on the FCAT, they've been able to reach what's called a concordant score on the SAT or ACT. What a blessing it is when the child does not have that hanging over their head and they've taken the ACT or the SAT, they've got the concordant score. The next time they take the FCAT, they're going to do their best. If they pass it, that is wonderful. If they don't, they know they can still graduate from high school. Do they have a plan of care? Are they receiving tutoring if they have not passed the FCAT? Is the child working in any specialized reading or mathematics intensive programs? These are all questions that are very, very good for you to ask at the school level. Problems in school can be of a behavioral nature. They can also be of an academic nature. So remember to separate the two when you're asking that question. Has anyone requested referral to what's called a child study team? Sometimes we have kids that no matter what we try, it seems that learning is just difficult for them, or behavioral constraints are difficult for them. There is a process now in place, and this is important, so write this down. It's called response to intervention. We know that things change, and now the new model is response to intervention. In my main classroom with all of my students, there are certain kinds of strategies that everyone has in place. If I'm not responding to those strategies, I go to the next level of intervention, which might be small group. If again I'm not responding, I might go to the third tier, which means I'm going to be having some pretty specialized instruction to try to figure out why behaviorally or academically things are very difficult for me. So response to intervention is a very important term for you to know. You'll hear it in an acronym called RTI. The educational decision makers typically in a school system are an entire team. You want to become part of that team. And sometimes if we don't have a lot of involvement with a parent, you can talk to your case manager or your CAM, and you can find out if a surrogate parent, and perhaps you would want to be certified as a surrogate parent, would need to be assigned to this child. We always know the needs of the child are the main concern that we're looking for. So if you have any concerns, contact your CAM or your case coordinator. Always in your mind be thinking, what can I do? What can I model to help my child or my children be more successful? Now we talked about ESE. Exceptional student education is a wide plethora of programs. It can be speech, it can be language, it can be being served in hearing impaired, it can be being served in learning disabilities. Any disability that interferes with the learning of the child is an exceptional student education program. If the child is in exceptional student education, in other words, they either were in ESC before the response to intervention model, or they've worked through level 1 with limited success, level 2 with limited success, then level 3, and then the decision was made that they needed to be in ESE. The child will have what's called an IEP. It is an individual education plan. It is very important to be involved in the development and the review of this IEP. It is developed and it is reviewed annually. The IEP is something that can enable a child with disabilities to have services through 21 years of age. Who signed the last IEP? If it is a middle school or a high school student, we would want to see the child's signature. We would want to see the local education agent, in other words, at the school, who's going to make sure that this IEP is followed. You would want to be there as part of the IEP team. You would want the exceptional student education teacher to be there, or perhaps the guidance counselor to be there. The bigger the team, the greater the input into the IEP, and the more likely the success for the child. Now, if you're working with a middle school or an entering high school student who is 14 years of age, remember that we are trying to prepare this child to transition into independent living. That is part of what begins when the child is 14 years or older. We begin to ask the child, what do you think you would like to do? Where do you see yourself 2, 3, 4 years from now? And how can we help you get there? Also, something that we need to remember is there are special considerations for children in every school district who are homeless. If you suspect that the child that you're advocating for does not have a home, ask the questions of what services and resources are available if the child is homeless. When you also go to the school, ask if the child has other services that they may need. Do they have transportation if they need to stay after school for tutoring? They might not. Sometimes children have difficulty and they need occupational therapists with something as simple as holding a pencil and learning to write or tying their shoe. They may need physical therapy because their motor development, their skipping, their hopping, their jumping is not where it needs to be. This often is with children that are younger than are middle and high school. But if you have a child that is disabled and they are cognitively delayed, you could have these difficulties also in the middle and high school. We always want the student to be in a program that's not too cold and not too hot. It's just right. That is called the least restrictive environment. When you're in a program that is too restrictive, you're being asked to do things that are beneath your ability. When you're in a program that is not restrictive enough, in other words, you've been put in almost all mainstream classes, you could feel overwhelmed. So finding the least restrictive environment, and those are big words that just mean a program that fits the needs of the child. If the child is enrolled in any ESE program, it's really important for their parent to be there and sign the IEP. Encouraging the parent to be there, we always want to do. And we always want to go back and see, did the parent have involvement in the development of the IEP in the past? If they didn't, encourage the parent to get involved. As I said, it makes all the difference in the world when we show that we're modeling and we're advocating for our child. If the child is 16 years or older, they need to really seriously be thinking about post-secondary education, the military, getting the finances to go to college, accessing services through the foster care environment that can help them get to college. Also looking into scholarships and applying for scholarships when they get to be a mid-year junior that they might be able to receive in order to go to college. Many of our colleges understand what it is like for a child to have risen in poverty, and they have scholarships for first-generation college graduates. Very important for us to ask those questions, and don't let the child say, I'm working on it, I'm working on it, I'm working on it. Be right there and say, show me what you've done. Have you registered for the appropriate tests? Have you taken your ACT? Have you taken your SAT? Have you applied for scholarships? Let's take a look at the senior newsletter, what's available, and also always understand that a GED is out there for children, and it is a general equivalency degree. It is not preferred, but a GED does give them the opportunity to go into some branches of the military during windows of time and be able to access employment. It is much better than having no high school equivalency diploma at all. Sometimes our child gets into behavior situations and they get into disciplinary situations. We need to be an advocate looking for, when does this typically occur? Is it in a particular time of the day? Does it seem to occur during the lunch period when our child's behavior gets bigger because the lunch period is less structured? Is there something that we can do to help? How about coming up to the school and eating lunch with our child and showing them that we care? Being there to determine if there are particular situations, particular peer groups, particular classes that the student tends to be having more trouble. Are they a person that doesn't have any sense of time and they stand in the hall and they talk, and their disciplinary actions are because they have been tardy to their classes? And that tardy can then become more tardies, and all of a sudden you've got this mountain of discipline that we need to try to keep down as low as we possibly can. So you're intervening and saying to the child, it is really, really important for you to do well in school, and my expectations for you are to go and learn and do the very best that you possibly can. Speak volumes. Sometimes we have students that have an IEP. We remember that is an individual education plan. If your child has an IEP, that means they have been in an ESE program. Any ESE student has to have a review of their educational program if they are approaching 10 days cumulative of out-of-school suspension. Now notice I use the word cumulative. 1 day here, 2 days there, a 5-day suspension. All of a sudden, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're at 10. So we need to find out, is the child really thriving in the exceptional student program that we have them placed in, or is there something more that we need to be doing? You're going to hear these words: functional behavioral assessment. The acronym is FBA. And in court, we use the word BIP for Batterer's Intervention Program. In education, we use BIP for Behavior Intervention Plan. So BIP in the educational setting is something that we find out, why is the student continuing to act up, and why can we not put certain parameters in place that help this child fit better into that particular educational setting. These are all things that the counselor and the child study team can help us with. When you go to the school, does the school know who is the CAM, the Child Advocacy Manager? And remember, you're going to have your badge, you're going to have your order appointing, you're going to have your notice of acceptance. Do they know who is the Family's First Network caseworker for the child? Do they know that this child has paperwork that says mom or dad is not to come to school to try to check this child out? That is very important, because sometimes the secretary will be presented with a situation where they need to find out if this person or this person does or does not have access to this child. It's always better to ask those questions ahead of time so that the secretary and the school don't find themselves in difficult situations. When you're looking at the child's records and you ask the question, is this a true reflection of this child's aptitude? Is the child performing the best they possibly can? What do you see as far as, is the child stronger in science and math? Are they stronger in the humanities? Is the child a person who loves the arts? What can we do to provide for them a little more shoring up of those areas that they have weaknesses in, and a little more of lifting them up in the areas that they have strengths in? Elementary and middle schools might have what is called an extended day enrichment program. Here's another acronym. Sometimes, and we know in this environment where parents have to work, the child goes to school before the school program in a program that is brought in by another agency. But does the school itself have before school tutoring that the child could go to? Does the school have after school tutoring? Or is there an outside agency that has after school care? Will any teachers stay after school? If I'm struggling with mathematics, would my algebra teacher stay after school with me? Does a high school have on Tuesdays all algebra students, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, go to this classroom for tutoring? All geometry students, whether it's geometry, geometry honors, or analytical geometry, go to this room for after-school tutoring. Totally free of charge. Teachers give because they want their children to be successful. There are 21st century learning programs in some schools. If you would like to ask if there is a community learning center that provides academic enrichment, call the 21st century learning program. You would want to ask that. It's particularly in schools and with students that are in very high poverty and low performing schools that might or might not relate to the school where your child attends. Here are some local interagency agreements. These you don't need to memorize because you can print out this PowerPoint. The Florida Department of Children and Families, DCF. The Department of Education, DOE. The Department of Juvenile Justice, DJJ. The Florida Agency for Persons with Disabilities, and to coordinate services for children served by the Florida welfare system. Something that I think is extremely important, when you have a child who is in the dependency system, is there any special transportation for that child? What if I want to stay after school for Latin Club? What if I want to be involved in Kiwanis through the Key Club? What if I'm staying after school for tutoring? Is there a way for me to get home other than the school bus that left when everybody else got on the bus and went home. Remember, we're trying to have for these children the ability to be as normal as possible. Extracurricular activities are extremely important. In addition to something as simple as when I turn 16 or 17, being able to get a driver's license. We have Kids First in our First Circuit. Don't be afraid to write a referral for your child to be able to access $100 for a band uniform, $100 for a trip to Italy with the chorus, $100 to have the ability to participate on the wrestling team because they need special shoes. Always find out what your child's interests and aptitudes are and advocate for them, because Kids First is there for these purposes. There are other local interagency agreements. We have a military interlocal agency agreement. We have said that in our communities, our military move in and out. We are not going to harm a child by waiting for records from perhaps Japan or Korea. We're going to take the word of the parent to the best of our knowledge and get them in the classes that the child and the parents say are of their ability level and what they were in. We request the records and we make adjustments after that. So there are a lot of state and local interagency agreements and responsibilities. These are all things that you don't need to specifically know about, but you need to find out at your child's school who could help you. One thing that I think is extremely important, if the family has moved around a lot, we find that the records lag behind the child. Sometimes the child is really an exceptional student education child, and we don't know that because the parent doesn't tell us. And when we begin to see that the child is having some difficulty, we have to go back and figure out where were they in school B, where were they in school C, because they're now in school A. Where was B, where was C, where was D, because the children do move around a lot. And we have a very mobile population in the entire United States. We have training and staff development that is offered at the state and local level, and this is for parents and foster parents and families. It's for people like you who want to know more about how to be an educational advocate. We have trainings in our own special sections of our counties in North Okaloosa and South Okaloosa, where we gather our volunteers together and do a little what we call crash course on how to be a better educational advocate. Just simply things that we may have forgotten since our beginning training. If you have questions, write those things down and don't be afraid to ask. Remember, there is no such thing as a foolish question, because I've probably already asked it. When we want to become a surrogate parent, there are ways that we're going to be able to do that, and that is on a slide that's going to be coming up in just a little bit. And remember that you are modeling, you are patient, you are advocating, and you want to be able to share appropriate information to help your child to be successful. The interlocal agency agreements talk with a lot of the things that we've already talked about. Stability. Is there a way that we can keep the child in the school until the school year is over, so they don't have to change schools as they have to move to different families? Is there a way that we can have the child transported to school earlier than or later than the typical schedule for extra programs, educational, extracurricular activities that they may want to participate in? Are you involved in talking with and planning with the people involved in the education of your child? Case planning is very important. So when an IEP is coming up, make sure that you put it on your calendar and you are there. Model for your child. Where are you going to go when you finish the 12th grade? Are you going to go into the military? Then research with your child, what do you need to do to get there? Are you going to go to a technical school? What do you need to do to get there? Are you wanting to go to a 4-year university? What do you need to do to get there? Remember, we talked about the ACT and the SAT. Those are things that you take them over and over, and if you need to, find a source for the $35 or $40 fee so that your child can take it over and over. Remember that the highest verbal score and the highest performance score go together to make the score that the university looks at, even if the test wasn't taken at exactly the same time. It could be a fall score where the verbal was higher. It could be a spring score where the quantitative was higher or the performance score was higher. The school they're wanting to get in looks at the highest scores. So that's extremely important for your child, for them not to be discouraged. Study for the one they didn't do very well on. Get some books from a bookstore or a library and go over the things that they're going to be needing to do. If they're interested in going into the world of work, help them get hooked up with employment opportunities, Jobs Plus, training programs. Can they be an apprentice in a program that they're wanting to go into? These are all things that, again, you're modeling for your child life after graduation from high school. They're in part of the local interagency agreements, there will be licensed residential programs. We do have some children who are in those licensed residential programs. Those children need our support extremely because they have a lot of difficulty. When we have children that are in group homes, it's often hard for them because they don't have someone to sit with them and have study time. So try to drop by and encourage them as much as you possibly can. Remember, if your child is in exceptional student education, that there are parental rights that will be spelled out. You have the opportunity to be part of the development of that IEP. When that child is transitioning at 16 years or older, we want them to begin to think about independent living skills. For some students in the more confined programs, independent living skills begin as early as 14 years old. So we want to make sure that the child, if they're going to live in a group home after they finish school, because they're not able to take care of themselves, that they begin that road to independence at 14. We also want to ask, if we have a child who is preschool, or even just 3 or 3.5 years old, and they're not speaking yet, can speech be put into a daycare? Is it important for a child to be in daycare where they get a more enriched environment? These are all things that you have to discuss with the child, the CAM, and the parent if the parent is active in the child's life. Sometimes when a child gets into daycare, they do begin speaking because there are a lot of things to talk about and there are a lot of people to speak to. And we no longer get to just point and say that we want something by using our hands or grunting. Our teachers make us ask for that. Early intervention is extremely important. Many school systems have programs called Head Start. All school systems have voluntary pre-K. These are all very, very important programs. We've talked about acronyms, we've talked about a BIP, we've talked about RTI process, we've talked about ESE, We've talked about an individual education plan called an IEP. These acronyms are not all that different than when you get into the court system and you start hearing acronyms. As you participate in the education process, you're going to find more acronyms, and sometimes it seems we're speaking a foreign language. Really, it just is a way for those of us who are in education to save time. And we don't mean to, but sometimes we forget that everybody at the table doesn't know what that acronym means. I've never been shy, and I'm never going to be shy. I will raise my hand and I will say, I don't understand what that means. Could you explain it to me? That is exactly what you can do when you don't understand what an acronym means. And you'd be surprised how the whole meeting will slow down, and people who didn't know what that meant but were too afraid to ask will go, oh, now I get it. So all of these terms and acronyms are not meant to confuse anybody. Just like in court, sometimes we have to lean over and we have to say, what does that mean? Because we don't know, and we can't possibly know all of those acronyms. We're going to have attached to this PowerPoint a handout of acronyms. Please do not let it overwhelm you, because it is simply for you and your reference. You won't encounter all of these, but if you encounter any of these and you have the opportunity to look up what it means, then our glossary and our acronyms and our handouts have been those that are meaningful for you. Thank you so much for sharing with me today. I hope you are as excited about the education of your child or the children for whom you advocate as I am. Have a great day.